As I'm doing this video, votes are being tallied up as we speak for the great 2024 election. And, obviously there might be some weird glitchy things that happen and people will say, oh, this is the most awful election ever. Well, I decided to tell you about two elections that America had that uniquely stand out as glitchy. And maybe give it to you as a comparison and maybe something else to think about while you're waiting for those vote totals to come in. So the first one we're talking about is the corrupt deal of 1824. At this point in our history, we effectively only have one political party, the Democratic Republicans. At this time in our history, candidates, especially the presidential candidates, do not campaign. It was considered very ungentlemanly and unseemly to go out and campaign for yourself. So it was entirely upon surrogates to do the work. So in this election, we end up having John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and William H. Crawford running for office. What ends up happening is Jackson ends up winning on the popular vote, not the majority of the vote, so he has a plurality. And Jackson ends up winning the most electoral votes, but not enough to win. He wins a plurality there as well. What happens when nobody gets majority of electoral votes? Well, the election is sent to the House. And this is how it works now. And this is a distinct possibility for this election. It is possible for this election to end in a tie, or possibly somebody getting not enough vote, nobody getting enough votes to win. You're saying. Um, so what happens is if the election gets sent to the House of Representatives, what will happen is each delegation in the House, like California's couple dozen representatives, all get to vote, and whoever they end up voting for, California applies one vote to the presidential election. So basically, all the states are exactly equal in this situation. And this isn't old timey Constitution stuff. This is exactly how it's still written. So this becoming a potentiality of playing out again exists. Now, what ended up happening is in the process of getting ready for the vote, the surrogates of all the candidates ended up arguing before Congress, trying to work out, convince people that they needed to vote for their guy. And ultimately, what ended up happening is John Quincy Adams, who was second place in getting votes and second place in getting electoral college votes, was made president. One of the things that occurs in the aftermath is Henry Clay ends up becoming Adams' Secretary of State, which at that time was considered an almost shoe-in stepping stone for making it to the presidency at some point. Jackson operatives accused Adams of a corrupt deal, and from this point on, it is still called the corrupt deal. Or, oh, what about our next election? Glitchy. Well, this one is known as the Compromise of 1877 as a result of the election of 1876, which was a very wild election. Uh, this is occurring less than a decade following the US Civil War. At this period in time, Union armies are still occupying southern states, and many argued that the federal army had an impact on the southern elections. And it's pretty obvious. We had a situation with a lot of African Americans being elected as Republicans in the South during this Reconstruction period. And once the Reconstruction period ended, it stopped happening until almost recent times. So clearly it was happening. So we had a race between Hayes, the Republican, and Tilden, the Democrat. With the election being over, Tilden had the popular vote and possibly the electoral vote. Possibly? How do you end up with possibly the electoral vote? Well, what ended up happening was there were a lot of confusion in the states of Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. They had a lot of problems with the way their electors had been picked, and there was a dispute over who were the actual electors for these states. So they actually had multiple slates of electors being looked at to be sent to the final vote in Congress. With the advent of this, teams of lawyers were dispatched to the disputed states to determine who in each of the sites of electors had been picked and try to find all the eccentricities of what happened to get an idea which ones were legitimate and which weren't. While this was going on, Congress came to the conclusion that they were kind of terrified at the idea that these lawyers would be bringing back this evidence showing which slates were which, and that they, as Congress, would have to certify or decertify these slates in an open Congress. Uh, this was considered to be something that was going to cause way too much turmoil. And with Congress just looking at the idea of just basically doing an up down vote on it, there were a lot of mutterings of civil war being heard already. So, in January 29th, 1877, in that time period, the president didn't take office until March 4th, Congress created an electoral commission. And some of these were actually past the dates that our state stipulated in the Constitution. Congress created this commission that had 5 House members, 5 senators, and 4 Supreme Court justices. This commission would make a decision that was binding. Now, their decisions could be nullified if both houses of Congress rejected their findings. But the way it was written essentially is once the committee made a decision, their decision would stand without Congress interjecting again. So Congress would only interject if they found something to be horribly wrong. Once again, rattlings of potential civil war were brought up. A lot of complaints were made. Up until this commission, it looked pretty clear that the Democrat president was essentially one electoral vote short of being president, whereas the Republican was close to a dozen short. And they were leaning heavily towards giving it to the Republican, which the South was not too happy. So what ended up happening is they had a big meeting at a downtown hotel, basically hash out the details to determine what they were going to do about all this. So in the end, the Democrats gave up their claim on the presidency, even though they had the popular vote and they had enough, or at least one short of enough electoral votes to be president. In exchange, the Republicans agreed to withdraw the remaining federal troops from the former Confederate states. They agreed to stop interfering in local Southern politics. They agreed to share patronage with the South, and I talked about patronage in another video. That's essentially the awarding of governmental jobs to staffers and such. The Republicans agreed to appoint at least one Southern Democrat to the cabinet, and he also committed to rebuilding the Southern railroads that had been destroyed during the Civil War. Now, if you're thinking, well, none of that can be legal, can it? Well, actually, it is. That's the funny part. Ultimately, Congress is the ultimate decider of how the elections turn out. There are rules they have to follow, but when they get to a point where the rules start breaking down, where it's like, okay, the process we have didn't work, Congress has the power at that point to intervene and come up with a solution to the problem. So, in fact, both of these elections are absolutely legally legitimate, and although not as likely to occur again, they're not out of the question that something like this could happen again. All right, in the comments section below, how many of you were aware of these 2 elections? Do you have any input? Like, do you know something about it I didn't go over that kind of interesting? Throw it in the comments below. Smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithms brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, check out my other titles. There's a lot of stuff you would probably like. Consider subscribing. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.